Καλημέρα σας. Ευχαριστώ.
Good morning. Thank you very much for coming today. I am Aggelos Petropoulos. I am editor-in-chief in Antenna in the journalism department. We have a wonderful panel here to talk about ethics, the challenges we have to deal with, the questions and the dilemmas. I would like to introduce the panelists. First of all, however, I have to say that Dragana Obradovic was to be here with us. She is the director in Serbia. She is the director of the Balkan Investigative Reporting Network. Unfortunately, for personal reasons, she hasn't managed to come. Now, if you need translation, because there will be French spoken as well, you can take this set. And let me start by introducing the wonderful colleagues. From my right, Mr. Yiannis Pantelakis. Most of you know him. He has done great things in journalism, newspapers, Ελευθεροτυπία, Earth Broadcasting and Εφημερίδα των Συνταγμών. He is also a writer of a very nice book, The Lost Honor of Journalism. Next to me is Mr. Lefteris Pitarakis. He is the head of the photography department of Associated Press Turkey, and he is also working in Athens Photoball, which is the only festival on photojournalism in Greece. And on my left, Mr. Younes Mjahed. He is the head of the International Federation of Journalists and head of the National Press Association of Morocco. We wanted to have this discussion because we believe that there are many issues having to do with ethics and deontology. We are all faced with many issues throughout our careers. We might work for TV, as I do, or work in press, printed material, like Yiannis, or maybe we work with photography like Lefteris. But anyway, we are faced with many questions every day. In Greece, we have even more questions in comparison to other countries of the world. First of all, I have to say that I have worked in Greece and abroad, and I have a double viewpoint. So I have seen how these issues are dealt with in foreign networks or foreign press organizations. And at the same time, on a daily basis, especially now that I have come back to Greece, I see what happens with the same issues in news in Greece, because time runs fast, there is huge competition, there are many demands, and the media in Greece are kind of restricted, I would say. So there are some issues touching upon ethics, having to do in general with producing journalism. For example, the available means for journalists. How you can deal with daily ethics and quite fast, because news have to be produced fast, and it's absolutely linked with the means you have at hand, with the money you can spend in order to obtain means, either to double or triple check a piece of news, or because you want to make sure that whatever you say is precise and it is the way it really happened. So all these issues need people, they need specialization, and they need money. Resources, in other words. Those who work in Greece know that resources are limited in all media. Even in the best conditions, means are not enough. Before working for Antenna, this happened about 1.5 years ago, I was working for 4 years for the NBC, the American NBC. Right now, this network is maybe the largest TV organization after the BBC. So I could say that the means available to me to be able to triple check something, a piece of news or a piece of information, were much more than what I have here. But nevertheless, the burden for all journalists is the same. A journalist might work for a big organization with many means assisting the journalist to check what has to be checked before writing or saying anything. And I think that this is very difficult in a smaller country such as Greece. Journalists have less means at their disposal. So let us start from Yiannis, and on the basis of our personal experience, maybe we could talk about the dilemmas we were faced with and our general viewpoint on the issue. Yiannis. Good morning, thank you very much for the invitation and the nice words. I wanted to say that what we call ethics in journalism or breaches of ethics does not have to do with the media and the journalists only. It has to do with society at large. If we do not keep the ethics, this has to do with the quality of our democracy. If fake news goes around, and the social media act as multipliers of fake news. So if huge groups of the population hear the fake news, they are going to form their political and social behaviors on a wrong basis. For example, if they find out that the immigrants burned a church, but this didn't actually happen, people that learn about it are going to shape a behavior based on fake news. This is just an example. There are thousands of similar examples every day. So ethics has to do with society at large. In our country, we ourselves, and here we have to engage in self-criticism, we avoid talking about it. And since we have our president here, we haven't done anything about ethics. Ethics in all forms, any debate. This is why I wrote this book, because I wanted to start this debate. Why are these things happening? Where are we heading to? And the occasion for the books was some research in our country for the last 20-25 years. And the phenomenon became even more acute in 2018. By way of a parenthesis, I have to say that the financial crisis has greatly affected the operations of the media. Large conglomerates collapsed, and the rest of the media were faced with huge financial problems, which in turn play a decisive role in the quality and ethics of journalism. Recent research, even this year research, indicates that our country is first in something negative, which means that Greeks themselves do not trust the media. This is very negative. Some research was done in January 2018, 38 countries, in 38 countries, and we were the last country, the 38th place, in some parameters having to do with ethics, that is, whether society trusts the media, the credibility of the media, and then interconnection. This is very important, interconnection between the media and various forms of power. So it seems that we have negative results in many cases. So we have to talk about it and try to deal with it in some fashions. So this is the story in my book. However, there is also something else. The lack of ethics is not a phenomenon of today. Fake news are not here just today. Fake news were there 2 centuries ago. They go hand in hand with journalism. The huge difference in the last years, or the last 50 years rather, is that the mass media play an important role in the operations of democracy, especially in the last 10 to 20 years. The existence of the internet and the expansion of the internet plays an even more important role. So, there were fake news in 1890, there are fake news in 2020. The difference is that in 2020, false information can start moving from us. I'm not talking about the users or the social media. They do not have the obligation to check, to cross-check. This is for us to do. But there are social media which act as multipliers. So a piece of fake news, if published in real time, within a few minutes or within a few seconds even, can travel around and reach huge numbers of the population. So let me say something, since we are talking about the social media and how frightening is their role in delivering fake news, in the dispersion of fake news. At the same time, they do play another role, something we have all found out. Many times they work by ways of checking us, controlling us. That's the other way around. Yes, that's very positive. We shouldn't demonize the mass media. They are not to blame, the social media. And an American talked about the journalism of the citizens. Citizens use the social media to do a type of journalism. This is not that they are competing with us. They are not going to get our jobs. On the contrary, this plays a very positive role. For example, there is information handed down to society, and the users of the social media can be quite powerful in their reactions, and they can even cancel an event, because as regards huge events, the news galleries start from social media. They are trying to find witnesses, for example, or testimonials. In the last months, for example, the reactions of the citizens have cancelled decisions, government decisions. Not only for this government. So we should think about it in another way. The traditional media, private TV is also a traditional media now, so they have lost their credibility. I'm not talking about the newspapers. A reduction in their influence is huge. You can see it in the numbers of the copies sold. Today, all daily newspapers, all of them together, have sales of around 50,000 copies, whereas 15 years ago, the official figure was 1 million or 1,200,000 copies. So the internet plays a decisive role. I'm not going to say that it is something absolutely bad, neither the social media. But we journalists now have a new role to play, and the internet media have to play their new role, but they don't do it in the way they should, in my opinion. You have the experience from the US, and you know that all broadcasters in the US have teams that double check the reality, or rather the truth of news moving around the internet. We do not have this. It's something that we should achieve. Now, let us hear what Lefteris has to say about some of the different dilemmas faced by somebody working with images, pictures. Some of the problems are similar with the printed matter, the press, or somebody who works as a correspondent for a TV channel. But there are also some different issues having to do with photography, especially as regards a photographer who is a war photographer. Hello. I would like to thank iMEdD for their invitation. I would like to thank them for the honor to be here in this panel. I would like to start by slightly disagreeing with what Yiannis said. Yes, of course, we have to see what our responsibility is, but we shouldn't forget the responsibility of the public. I believe that in our societies we should have some training and education on the media. This should become part of our educational system. My daughters, for example, have to learn the difference between a yellowish or yellow press and a channel which has a full cast of people working on fact-checking and quality. This is to be further debated, I hope. Look, my role, I just take the photos, so my experience comes from the Middle East. I left Greece in 2000. Of course, I follow closely what happens in the country, but I do not have the daily experience like Yiannis or some others. I have the luxury of seeing things from a distance. So my experience has to do with photography. I worked in the Middle East. In 2000 I was in the Palestine, in Israel, and my experience has mainly to do with ethics as regards the relationship we have with the people we take photos of, which is similar, however, to the relation between journalists that write with their sources. Yes, of course, of course. These links are unbroken, and I have early realized that you have a huge responsibility vis-à-vis the people you take photos of and the events you cover. So this responsibility cannot be taken by anybody else. There is this responsibility, it's always there, and it has to do with the people you work with. In most cases, they let us be in some of the most difficult times of their lives. In times they suffer loss of their people, or in cases of huge loss of property, when something tragic happens in their lives. This is a huge responsibility vis-à-vis these people, and of course huge responsibility vis-à-vis the public that has to hear your message. I'm faced with many dilemmas. I was faced with many dilemmas right from the start of my career. And your role, the role of your presence there is very important because you change the reality. The fact that I will be there at a place with my cameras like a Robocop, does this change the reality or not? How much? For example, I had this discussion in the morning with my wife. It reminded me of an event of the past. When I was in the Palestine sometime after Friday prayer, I found out that some young people were there and they wanted to create some turmoil. They were walking towards some Israeli soldiers and they were there to throw stones. I realized that they were there because I was there too. So, in many times, I had this dilemma in 2000. I was still in the beginning of my career. So, what happens? What is the reality? What is the truth? What is going to happen in front of me? Is it something true or is it something that I provoked? And what am I supposed to do? In that case, I just left. And I asked other colleagues, tell them, let's leave, because what was going to happen wouldn't be true. This is just a case in point from my experience. Of course, as Yiannis said, and photography exists in the last 200 years, or maybe thousands of years. But as regards photography, I could say that we have photography in the last 150 years. Fake photos were always there, so it's not something new. So it's something that has been happening for many years, but it's very important for us to know that it is happening. We have to protect ourselves. Of course, we have huge associations, and of course, there are codes of ethics, and we have to know these codes of ethics, and we should always respect other people, and of course, we have to respect our profession.
I would like to give the floor to Younes so that he can tell us what is his experience regarding these issues internationally. I believe that Greece is not at the top of the list compared to other countries abroad, but tell me, how are you dealing with such issues in other countries compared to Greece? Σας ευχαριστώ. Thank you for giving me the possibility to be with you during this meeting and participate in that conversation, which is so interesting and important for the whole of the society, because defending the freedom of press is a duty for the whole of society. And ethics and deontology is similar. What is happening with the citizens, the social networks, all this uncertainty makes deontology and ethics an issue pertaining to the whole of society. It has to do with journalists, with press agencies, associations, the whole of society. Our international confederation unites all sorts of press unions, and I would like to say thank you to my friends who have inspired me to come here today, because we work in tandem with the press unions, because this is how we deal with these issues at an international level. You have to cooperate with the unions in order to defend the freedom of press and ethics and deontology that should characterize our profession. As you know, the International Press Association has an ethics map for a number of years. It has been recently updated at the Tunis Congress, but apart from the texts themselves, there are some questions we should answer. Let me give you an example. It has to do with a conference that we organized in Cadiz in 2010. I had to conduct some research concerning the future of journalism under the light of the internet, the social networks, etc. And it was a project of a vast scope, and I will give you the results in a nutshell, because as far as we are concerned, and this has also been mentioned a while ago, we were told how important money is and what is the future of journalism being interconnected to other networks and associations. So we said that in order to defend the profession, we have to be made accountable as members of unions, but we also need a democratic state and the rule of law, because in order to have professional journalism, in order for the state to protect free press, then the state has to take charge, if of course it is a democratic state. This is not just a matter for the unions. All democratic political parties should give a hand. The civil society, the elites, all associated organizations have the following duty to defend the democratic and professional press. So we have to stand up for newspapers. They should go on existing. And all institutional bodies defending the press should be supported because they are working for the common good. So these are the results of our conference in Agadis, but of course in every country things are different. I am talking about my personal experience in my country. We have been working on things for a very long number of time, and we tried to get organized through committees and institutions, but we realized that it is not possible to impose ethics on institutions and journalists, and then we chose another alternative after a debate at the parliament, and we passed the law. There is an institutional body which is called the National Press Council. It's an independent authority that has been elected by the journalists themselves. That means that we organized elections where the journalists participated. I am a unionist and a syndicalist. I used to be the president of our association. I no longer am, but the point is we organized elections and we voted the people who participated in that independent authority. So things are different in every country, and we try to adapt to the local conditions. Therefore, as an international press association, we believe that we have to support such institutions. We have to get organized. We have to stand up for our rights against power and money, and we have the tools to do that. We have to be open to the whole of the society, to all sorts of institutional bodies that are governed by democracy, in order to stand up for democracy and human rights, because this is our philosophy and this is the vision for which we stand for. In other words, you believe that you have to get organized and work through the unions. This is what you believe. This is what you think you should do. Is that right, Younes? First, this is our duty. This is our job, alongside the unions, but then the whole of society should participate, because the union tier, let's say, is a kind of an intermediate level in comparison to the rest of the society. Journalists need to be organized in order to stand up for ethics and the freedom of press. They need to stand up for their dignity, because this is a kind of a precarious profession facing the risk of poverty. So we have to stand up for our rights, to stand up for ethics inside the companies and the agencies for which journalists are working. These are our tools in order to be close to society and keep working, because you can't survive without being organized.
Υπάρχει και ένα άλλο κομμάτι που δεν το έχουμε.
There is something else that we haven't touched upon up to now, and I'm referring now to our audience. If you want to intervene, you are most welcome whenever you wish to intervene. You don't have to wait till the end of the panel. And I would like to say the following thing. You need to study and do a course before you become a journalist, normally. And through my personal experience, because I have worked for a number of years as a journalist before studying for my postgraduate at the Columbia Journalism School, I had an amazing professor on ethics when I followed that program. He has really helped me to utilize my previous experience as a journalist and be able to understand why I made impulsive decisions or why I followed one course instead of another. So I would like to call upon Janina Ked, who is the Associate Dean of this journalism school. So I'm calling upon her so that she can tell us through her experience how academia and university schools can help us on issues pertaining to ethics and deontology.
Just listening for the end of the translation. First of all, I want to say thank you to our experts on the panel and how much I appreciated how they have laid out for us what the challenges are for us as journalists and how important this linkage is, particularly between ethics, ethical practices, and the trust of our audiences. I think it's critical for all of us at the same time that we are embracing the new technologies and using them, that we also have to hold fast to our traditional values. We all have been taught you need multiple sources, you need documentation, you need people on the record. This is how we demonstrate that we know this is the truth. This is how I think we help to win the trust and the support of our audiences. And just maybe a couple of quick thoughts. I take the point NBC and the other big news organizations in the United States are well-resourced to do the kind of fact-checking and spotting of fakes. But they are in the minority. And most news organizations, the vast majority of news organizations in the United States are local news outlets, and they have been hit very hard financially, and some have closed, many have shrunk, and this is a situation I know we're facing the whole world over, and they simply don't have those kinds of resources. And so I think it is a challenge that at a time when technology is making these deep fakes easier to do and harder to detect, there are fewer resources to help to be able to spot that kind of thing. And I think that it's important for all of us to be mindful of this in our work and to start thinking about new frontiers in this space, to think about as more and more thinking and reporting, and in some cases misinformation, moves into social media private groups where journalists may not see it if you're not in that group. That poses a whole nother level of challenge for all of us. And so I'm very glad that we have experts like these on the panel today and our colleagues in the audience to work through these challenges and use technology to help to improve our ethical practices and hopefully also to win the trust of our audiences.
I just wanted to dig into a little bit into how journalism schools can particularly assist this conversation.
Well, I think we are all learning about that because the situation keeps evolving. at Columbia, I can say we teach ethics. It's required in all of our curricula, in the reporting. I know there's a number of people who are here today who've been there and have experienced it. We drill the fundamentals, right? It isn't all just about technology. It's about good practices. It's about being careful. Yes, you want to be first, but you have to be right. And so some of it is just going back to the basics, and it's about being fair, not just seeing there as being two sides. There are a lot of sides to a situation, and taking those extra steps to not only try to be accurate, but to represent as fully as we can all of the perspectives. At the same time, I think it's also a moment for all of us to be joining together to think about the new technologies and how we can use the technology to help us to identify when there is misinformation and to be able to bring that to our audiences. And of course, there are lots of different ways, and we're all learning about how to do that now.
Θα ήθελα να ξαναγυρίσω σε ένα...
Let me come back to a point made by Yiannis initially. Why, in newsrooms in Greece, why is it that there is no huge debate about this issue? Why is it that journalists talk about many other things? This is my experience too. And it seems that they are not that concerned. They do not discuss a lot about it. It seems that in other countries, these issues are discussed more in the newsrooms. Why is it? Look, I haven't identified any special reasons. I think that it is difficult for a professor or for a profession or for the media to engage in self-criticism. We have to be brave. And most journalists, I would say, we shouldn't say everybody, but most of them know what happens. They know about this negative image of journalism in society. But the point is, can they actually do something about it? Because it's not easy. Look, especially as regards journalism in Greece, many of us, at least in the last decade, and the younger colleagues started working in times of crisis, in times of shrinkage of the media. We were trying to find a job and try to see what the next step for us could be in very difficult conditions. Now, for many of us, actually this is my personal experience too, look, collectively, it seems that we have lost our self-respect after everything that has happened. Could it also be a reason why there is no debate about self-improvement? Look, this is a reason, but we have to take into consideration that in Greece we have an exceptional phenomenon. It's something unique in Greece. It's not there in Europe or the US. This deep financial crisis had a great impact on journalism itself. Unemployment, for example, is more than 50% for journalists. Very big media conglomerates collapsed. So the situation is now completely different. It's not that journalists do not know that we don't do things properly. The point is whether we can do something about it and take it a step forward. And there is also a second parameter. Even if we manage to engage in this debate and find some ways out through our unions, unfortunately, a large part of the society is addicted to another type of journalism. Circulation or the number of copies sold by newspapers, click numbers, we're all running after click numbers as regards web pages. All these indicate that a great part of our society is addicted to yellow journalism, bad journalism. Because we talked about the responsibility of the people, of the public. Yes, the receiver of information is also responsible, but we have trained them for many years to accept this type of information. And now we have reached a point where, of course, I'm not saying that there is no way back, but it's very difficult to say to somebody, to a viewer, a TV viewer, you cannot easily say that a journalist shouldn't belong to any party. This runs contrary to ethics. But now society sees panels, and the panelists actually represent parties, political parties. People are used to it. You cannot cancel this unless you do. You have a huge job. It takes a huge amount of job to do this. Okay, let us not accuse small countries for lack of resources. The party politics in journalism is a US phenomenon going back many years ago. Let me now bring in something else. Our employers. I think that it's up to us to start a discussion with our employers about their responsibility. Coming back to what I mentioned before, it takes resources, it takes manpower, and it takes specialization. So our employers have to understand that they're also responsible. And actually, they can become proud of having a credible newsroom, to be proud of the product, actually. This is for the benefit of journalists and the owners of the media as well, because if the owner has managed to create a credible media, is good for them, so it's for them too. Now, in a huge organization like your organization, Lefteris, how is a newsroom prepared to deal with these dilemmas?
Look, there are many issues we could talk about. As it has been said, there is a kind of code of ethics that has been kept by us all, but that is not enough. That's why I mentioned a while ago the notion of responsibility, individual responsibility and the people's responsibility, and for the things that we are responsible for. For instance, there has been a large discussion being conducted in news agencies today. I mean, I am supposed to be covering news in Turkey. Who am I? Do I speak Turkish? Do I know what is happening there? How much can I represent such a society? How close am I to them? For instance, why in our stand in France or in Brazil is just manned by white people? Why do we have only 30% of women working for us in photography? There are representation issues regarding journalism and photography. These are questions to which we have to answer on a daily basis. And over a number of occasions, we have discussed during panel meetings issues pertaining to independence and objectivity. And I came to disagree with a lot of people because I do not consider myself to be objective. I don't get trapped between subjectivity and objectivity. I am only interested in honesty. There comes a time where we have to understand that there is no way to be completely independent. You are partial one way or another, but you have to be honest and honorable in the way you are covering news and in the way you are communicating with people. That is my point of view. I think you are right. I don't think we can talk about objectivity anymore. Since we decide to cover story A and we drop story B, that means we are making a choice. That means you are becoming partial. You have a certain view of things. Honesty and transparency are related to the way you are looking upon things and you are communicating things to the public. This is my opinion. I don't know if Younes has something to add. I would like to add the following things. First of all, what can we do now with all things happening in the social networks? In general, we don't really have any statistics, but we could say that there is a kind of an express news and the public likes that. But we are also a part of the target group. They are coming to us, to our union members and representatives, and they held us accountable. Look, we are facing such a problem. They are interested in scandals and fake news. But on the other hand, most citizens are aware of the problem and they come into contact with us. That's why we have to behave like professionals. Professional journalists and syndicalists come into contact with other institutions in our society. We have to work in tandem because the civil society is an organized society. For instance, think of high schools or universities. Think of political parties. I think that there are a lot of things that can be done in cooperation with other organized segments of society. Now, objectivity is a fundamental issue in journalism because, let's say, three different journalists can look upon the same event and give a completely different perspective depending on their attitude and philosophy of life. That is true. But the point is to be honest. Am I honest or am I lying? Am I, let's say, getting across my point of view but in an honest way? And this is very important for research journalism. Not just transmit news, but get deeper and give answers. That is the true work of research journalism. And this is very important so that we can get over the social media problem. If you want the public to trust you, you have to be a serious journalist, a serious researcher, and justify your way of working. A while ago you talked about children and young people. This is very dangerous, what is happening with social media. For instance, I have an 11-year-old daughter and I have warned her that she has to be careful with internet. And she asked me, where can I get the necessary information? And I told her, well, go and watch some telly or read the papers. And then she told me what was happening, and I told her, look, be careful because you're being manipulated. And the girl asked me, where can I get the truth? You are telling me that I am being manipulated, that I am not getting the truth. So as a father, I'm actually giving journalism lessons to my daughter, how she can get to the truth and bottom of things and what she's getting from the social media, etc. So education is fundamental. We have to educate people how to receive information. This is something that cannot just happen through the unions. It's a democratic state that has to be in charge. We need their support for the freedom of press to go on. And I think what you're doing, trying to educate the media, is something extremely important. I think we have some questions. Look, I don't have much time. I am a journalist. I have been working for a newspaper and a TV station, and I have a legal question. Where do we stand from a legal point of view in Greece? I have studied journalism at university. I have worked in TV stations and newspapers. I am a syndicalist, and the only thing they have given me is some brief information by our union when I joined the profession. So we need more information. And okay, we have some general values. And then you have given us a very typical example that every person interprets things in their own way. But what is modern ethics for the mass media in Greece in 2020? I agree to a great number of things that have been said, and I will be held accountable for all my mistakes, because I could tell you the following thing. Normally they don't tell me what I need to say, but I exercise a kind of self-censorship on myself because I know what the things need to come across. But I know what is happening with fake news, which is being a plague for the sector, but the point is how many of, let's say, how much of personal information am I allowed to give to the world? I have studied several subjects at university, such as constitutional law, but I don't have, let's say, a kind of mapping that could help me to go about. We need specialized journalists. I'm working for the Ministry of Maritime Affairs. There are just 5 people covering that ministry in Greece. So we need some kind of training so that we know how to deal with important issues like the refugee crisis. And that topic you have mentioned is very related to how things are done in Greece. So what is, let's say, a kind of legal coverage and foundation about journalism? Look, in our syndicalist union, I don't know whether you have received it. It's not just a piece of paper, the thing you have received from your union. Look, I just received a piece of paper with 15 bullets talking about general values. But we need specific instructions. For instance, you can't mention names before you start presenting a piece. Look, this is one of our daily problems when we are issuing the news bulletins. For instance, I will give you a very tangible example. In Greece, for instance, we are not allowed to mention names that are being persecuted for specific offenses till the court decision becomes final. All appeals and remedies should be applied before we mention their name. Now, what is my point of view? Because on a daily basis we touch upon many court cases. For instance, in one news bulletin, we might mention, let's say, 10 judicial cases that are being open on a daily basis. We are not allowed to mention the defendant's name or the victim's names. And our law is very restrictive on the matter. Of course, incredible things have happened in Greek journalism. People have been lost their reputation because somebody thought that could give their name to the press and make it public. This is a daily occurrence in my life, and I believe this is one of the greatest crimes regarding TV journalism, which is a kind of a very immediate form of journalism. And this is one of the most important factors why people don't trust TV reporters, because when you see me each and every night on a news bulletin and I am talking about court cases without giving any names. So let's say as a journalist, I feel that I am not talking about something very specific. This is a newsroom problem. And then another layer is that you, as a member of audience, you think that since I am not being specific, then I am not telling you the truth. I'm just telling you stories. And I can give you the opposite example. Think of women that are HIV positive. These women had their names being mentioned in public. They had a very hard time, and then they were found innocent when their case was tried at court. And some of them also died. And we are talking about pictures that became public in web pages of such women back in 2012. Now we are in 2020. Despite the fact that such pictures made public should not exist on the internet, well, they are still uploaded. The point is, we are under a legal obligation that we are not supposed to mention names and what has happened during certain situations. That means we are not entirely accountable. This is an issue having to do with personal data, and it has been resolved in many countries. Here in Greece, we operate under a certain law that a priori admits that as a journalist, I cannot be responsible for what is being written on a certain person. A priori, first by law, and then, let's say, by general public awareness, I am considered as unable to deal with such a case in public.
Two remarks. One having to do with the final remarks. Well, the issue, well, it seems that we have lost focus in Greece, is the limit between the interest of the public to know and privacy. Back in the law school, we learned that there is a limit. Is the event important? Is it important for the public? If not, we have to respect privacy. So maybe this is an interesting piece of news, but not that interesting. So there is this limit. We have to redefine the limit in the Greek society. Who is going to do it? Journalists, lawmakers, but we have to redefine the limits. And a second thing, it's right for us to try to be objective, and we don't want journalists to engage in party politics. I have to say, however, that the public, the educated public, even the educated public, accuses journalists that try to be objective, and they will support one party and then another because they think that this is not correct. So it seems that the public goes against a journalist who said this and then they say that. Oh, they have changed now, haven't they? They say. So it's very important to educate the public and society. Coming back to what our colleague said, I just have to say that this is true for us all. Maybe there are some general principles, and some of them are there in the bullet points of SEA, and we all know what they are. SEA is the Journalists Association of Athens daily newspapers, but we have to deal with them on a daily basis. It's up to us. It's our individual viewpoint. We have self-respect. We are investigating and we are trying to be honest, to have an honest relationship and be transparent with our sources and the public. At the same time, we have some internal rules in the newsrooms. A piece of news, an article, something written by a correspondent, or even a photo, of course, a video, whether there is an editor or not. Is there an editor for shipping, for example? What is the type of management within a newsroom? All these decisions finally inform the outlook of a specific broadcaster or any media as regards ethics. So these discussions have to be daily discussions, and if they are not provoked, it's the journalists that have to ask the editors, or the other way around. So I think that in Greece, we have to talk about these issues on a daily basis, frequently, as frequent as possible. Coming back to what was said before about self-censorship, this is a huge issue. It seems that the journalists internalize the views of the editor. They know the views of the editors and they restrict themselves because they are afraid of being fired. I worked in newspapers and there were meetings, and the meetings decided on the titles and you had to write something to match the title. Sometimes I had to change words in order to water down a few things because of the political direction, and some of the journalists would ask themselves, what are we doing here? Why are we working as journalists? Maybe we would just sell fruit and have a grocery shop or whatever. This would be more honest. And I think that the Journalists Association of Athens daily newspapers is there, and we have two classes of journalists. Those who were working in newspapers were threatened that we would be fired or we would have to work for €300 per month. I think that the Journalists Association of Athens daily newspapers is invisible, and I think that the newspapers have lost their way. There are meetings and the directors try to see what's catching, what's eye-catching on the internet sites, and they are trying to find another view. But this is a lost game because the other view is the yellow view, and we journalists have to become fact checkers to do something about the pressure of the editors. Of course, we have to do it, it's our job, but those working in newspapers have to know that in newspapers we should have more time and do investigative journalism, unless there is no chance for us to fight against the internet and win. It seems that we have to wrap up. So we would like to thank you all for being here. Just a few words as regards the relation between the law and ethics. So I was saying that we cannot limit ourselves to legislation. This is why we have codes of ethics. Codes of ethics are there to become legislation at a later stage. This is the way it usually happens. This is why codes of ethics are very important for journalism. There is a code initially, and then we have jurisprudence, court decisions to be further discussed by lawmakers. So this is why I insist that a code of ethics is even more important than legislation. So we are allowed 5 more minutes. I just wanted to say that these 24 hours could be spent on ethics alone. And this wouldn't be enough, so we still have another 5 minutes. Hello. I have a dilemma. I work in newspaper, a Lefteris newspaper. I'm doing court reporting, and I have to choose between two sides. I am a trade unionist as well in the Thessaly Association. I work for 8 hours to get a piece of news. Indeed, those working in courts know what it is about. And there is yet another route. I could just sit at home in front of a TV screen or a monitor, and then you can set up a site to get advertisements. What should I do? We are here, we care about our jobs. Okay, we like ethics, but can I just take it out, steal from others, and set up a web page to get advertisements? Or should I go out, go to the court to find a small piece of news? I know which my way is, I have chosen, but how about our young colleagues? How can they survive? Do newspapers actually pay for a piece of news? I was glad all through these years to see the change of the criminal code. We had this change in the criminal code in Greece after a specific court decision I covered. 7:15 every morning. The sites use pieces of news from the newspapers. How about the young journalists? What are they supposed to do? Thank you. Look, it's a rhetoric question. It's the individual stance. This has to do with the employers and the way they see their newsroom. It has to do with self-respect, it has to do with the internal organization of the newsroom, that is the relation between the reporters and the editors, and the sense of responsibility of the enterprise, the business people. Of course, what you mentioned lastly, that there is a newspaper having 15 journalists to be paid, there is operational cost and so on and so forth. They run after a piece of news. It becomes public, and this piece of news is replicated or stolen by 30 sites. This has to do with all newspapers, not just in Larissa and Thessaly, and it has to do with the sustainability of our work. My name is Sakarestou from Pantheon University. It has to do with the term fake news. In the US, there is a huge debate whether it is a good choice as regards the credibility. Should we always talk about misinformation and fake news under fake news? Because we think that actually we say that journalism and news are identified with fake news in the minds of the people. So we use the term fake news, but we actually enhance the viewpoint that news are fake news. Could you please make some comments on this? Maybe the university could help us in finding another term. So actually, in the US, we avoid using fake news, this term. And I tell my students actually that if we repeat the term, well, this is a campaign in favor of the view that news are fake. So disinformation, misinformation is better. This is a multidimensional phenomenon, but when we say fake news, we mean that news are fake. This is a campaign in favor of fake. In my view, there is a difference between misinformation and fake news. Because fake news is organized, the whole groups working on producing fake news, whereas misinformation, it is misinformation, but it is promoted in an organized way. Of course, the source is the same. There are even groups working with robots to promote fake news. Of course, the basis is the same. It is misinformation again. But misinformation is one thing because there has been a mistake, for example, but what is happening now is something completely different. We have an industry producing fake news. So I think, of course, we could go on forever on this topic, but we have to stop here. Thank you very much for being with us.